When we talk about going back to folks that we might have had conversations with, oftentimes we are talking about your, quote, run-of-the-mill person. But what about those folks that are really the highest level folks? The lawyer that's been practicing 15 years. I want you to think about what you can gain from hiring that type of person versus what you would gain from hiring someone who is your everyday average Joe. I want you to think about that higher level attorney as the ungettable get, and think about how great it would be for your law firm if you were to hire that talent. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Crushing Chaos with Law Firm Mentor podcast, where on today's episode, we're going to answer the question, should you circle the block on your past potential hires? All right, let's talk about it. So for those of you that have not heard the phrase before, I guess it's probably helpful that we start by answering the first question you might have, which is, what does it mean to circle the block? Okay. So one of the common catchphrases that we hear in today's lexicon is circling the block. And that really is referring to dating an ex, right? So for those of you that are in the music world or are interested, there are any number of celebrities that have dated in the past and then regenerated a new relationship in today's day and age after having some period of time of having broken up. One of the ones that immediately comes to mind is in the R&B world, Ashanti and Nelly, right? So these folks dated when they were in their 20s, and now she's in her mid 40s, he's in his early 50s, and they got back together again and ultimately got married and had children and what have you. Well, why would someone be willing to consider going back to an ex? Most people say an ex is an ex for a reason, right? So if you apply that same logic to the hiring world in a law firm, you could say, why would I be willing to regenerate a conversation with someone who I was courting before it didn't work out? Why would I want to court them again? Or why would I be open to a relationship with them again in the future? And most people would say they weren't, right? It could be you had a conversation, maybe they applied to your law firm through an ad, and that conversation started and went nowhere. Maybe they didn't present at that time as the person you'd want to hire, or maybe you actually did want to hire them. You really wanted to lock that down, and they accepted another offer without telling you. They were even considering another law firm at the time. So they didn't give you a chance to even compete for them kind of in the final throes. Or maybe it was in negotiations, right? Maybe they started making unreasonable demands and you said, this person's not worth what they're asking for, or just not worth the hassle of how they chose to engage in that interaction. We definitely have had clients here at Law Firm Mentor that it isn't necessarily what the request is, it's how the request was made. Maybe there was an air of entitlement that was disproportionate to the skill level of the attorney or paraprofessional they were hiring. Or maybe even it was in how they communicated, right? We even had one client, I'll tell a quick anecdote about this. One client said to us that they actually shared with us the communications. They were going back and forth on negotiating with a candidate, and the candidate asked for a certain amount of money that was slightly higher than what they offered. And they said, well, I think this person ultimately could be worth that relatively quickly. They're going to require a little bit more training and development than I ultimately would like to put into them, but it would be worth it if we can get this particular role in the company. So, ultimately the person got to yes. And after some discussion around what the offer is, so I'm just going to use some flat numbers. Like, let's say the candidate wanted $60,000 and the firm was offering $55,000. Firm says, okay, we're willing to come up to 60 because even though that might be on the highest end of the range for this role and this person is not highest end of range qualified, we're willing to take the gamble on the person because it's only $5,000 and we'll be able to recoup the money and yada, 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 right? So the law firm ultimately, after initially saying that wasn't what the price range was for your skill level, but we are willing to work with you, what is it that you think would sell us on paying you that amount? The candidate responded and was very persuasive and very assured of himself when he responded. So the firm ultimately said, based on what you've said, we're willing to go forward. We're going to offer you exactly what you're asking for. And here's what the total package is going to look like. In response, the candidate actually said, well, I've been giving this some more thought and I actually want 65. And it was just the manner in which they kind of discounted that the ball was in their court. They made an offer, the law firm accepted, and then they essentially said, oh, no, here's another offer. It spoke of a little lack of integrity and kind of, sometimes depending on who the person is, what their role is, they might not be trained in or skilled in negotiation. So you might want to give them more grace, but the air and the tone of the now I want more email was definitely one where the firm said, not so sure I want this attitude in the company. And ultimately they said, in light of your newest request, we are moving forward with another candidate. Thank you for your time. The candidate tried to circle back and say, all right, I'll take 60, which by that time it was too late. But anyway, I tell that story just to kind of orient you all to something I'm sure most law firm owners have experienced or will experience, which is you are excited about a prospect, you are reeling them in, you are about to get that exciting new hire, and then things don't work out. And the question becomes, if that person goes back into the marketplace and later reapplies, or you start having conversations with them, or just kind of encounter them when you are starting to look for that role again, maybe you hired somebody, it didn't work out for you, or maybe you never hired, is it worth it to go back to someone who didn't fit before? Now, if they didn't fit for the reasons I shared in that anecdote, i.e. wrong attitude, wrong approach, it might be worth a conversation to explore that with them. Maybe they were just misguided. But many times we have reservations about people that didn't get over our finish line in the past because of whatever it was that led them to not work out. And we oftentimes don't want to revisit because we say, I have moved forward. I've moved on with my life. I want to move forward. I don't want to go backward. But I want you to really consider today's competitive market and whether or not you have that same flexibility, that same luxury in a market that is challenging the way that today's market is challenging. So we know that in the legal industry right now, we are experiencing a loss, right? And this is something that is really statistically happening across the United States, and really in many other circles, many political and economist circles, at least that I follow. I'm hearing that it's happening across the world, which is that the population is aging, but the rate at which we are replacing people that would go into the workforce is at a lower rate than those that are dying off. So there's going to be less talent available overall. By the way, shameless plug for you making sure that you understand how to use AI for that reason, if no other. But I digress, okay? If we have fewer people in the marketplace, fewer people that are going to be able to replace our workforces, then there is going to be a tighter constriction on the hiring market, and there's going to be more competition for candidates that are in the market, especially once those candidates have gotten enough experience in their respective fields that they can actually add value, right? Once upon a time, it was very much the case that, if you were young and hungry, you were in demand because we were going to train you up. And then the market kind of shifted and younger folks were less valuable because they knew less, and the legal market became even more of a place of flux. So you knew that if you hired somebody, the time and energy you spent training them, you may or may not recoup before they left for greener pastures elsewhere, because they don't know yet what it is to work in a law firm, and they don't know that they're going to want to work in your size of firm, your type of firm, your area of law, etc. Right? So we adapted to that by no longer hiring folks earlier in process, at least not at the rate that we once were. So a lot of those folks now are starting law firms, among other things, right? So we've adapted. This is an area of time, a stage of our world as law firm owners that we have to adapt. And I want you to think about who has been in your pipeline before that might be a candidate for a new conversation. Now, the anecdote that I gave earlier was about somebody who was hiring a paraprofessional, but I want you to think about hiring lawyers. And I'm going to take this to not just hiring lawyers, but hiring higher level lawyers, right? Hiring people that have more experience. There is a shifting dynamic that I sense going on in the legal industry right now, where there is a little bit of conflation of real value to marketplace value, right? A lot of lawyers who are barely able to do the practice area in which they are applying, barely experienced in that area, think themselves highly worthy, right? Highly valued because they're able to command a very high salary. The only reason they're really able to command that salary is because of market forces, right? Supply and demand. When there is less supply, the demand is greater and hence the price goes up, right? So oftentimes there is a disconnect and a frustration that happens between the law firm owner and the law firm employee, where the employee believes that he or she is worth their weight in gold, but the owner recognizes, just 5 years ago, you would have commanded a lot less in salary, not because you were worth less as a human, but because you are worth less to the market and worth less to me as an owner. You're not worth any more to me as an owner today, but I'm paying significantly more because of market forces, right? That is something that we all have to adapt to as business owners, right? Money has its own value, but it's the value to the holder that is the most important. So we have to think about that when we think about how we're compensating and what structures we put in place to do that. But having said that, I just kind of give those prefatory thoughts because when we talk about going back to folks that we might have had conversations with, oftentimes we are talking about your quote run-of-the-mill person, the person who's going to bill the hours or handle the cases or process the legal work or transact business. But I want to take this to a next level conversation, which is, what about those folks that are really the highest level folks, right? The lawyer that's been practicing 15 years, that knows their stuff, has a great reputation, is really up and coming, is starting to generate or already is generating a sizable book of business. What about those folks? Those folks, the true adults in the room that can come in immediately and add value, those folks oftentimes are harder to sell. They're harder to get through your hiring pipeline. And part of the reason why they're harder is because they are in more demand. But I want you to think about that as a positive thing, right? I want you to think about this as, and I use this analogy often, right? No one wants the captain of the Parcheesi Club, right? We all want the captain of the football team. So when you think about perceptual status, I want you to think about what you can gain from hiring that type of person versus what you would gain from hiring someone who is your run-of-the-mill, everyday average Joe that is in greater supply, right? So I want you to think about that higher level attorney as the ungettable get, and think about how great it would be for your law firm, what you could use that person for in terms of marketability of your law firm if you were to hire that talent. And law firms that focus on the quality of talent have an easier time growing. We see that time and time again. And by the way, this is not just law firms. This is really in any professional services industry. Anytime you're talking about hiring people, yes, there are people that you could pay less, that you could bring in, that could do an adequate job of the work. But those are not the people that, no matter how strong a marketing system you build around them, are going to be able to naturally and intuitively generate work for your law firm. And for a lot of you, you might be saying, that's perfectly fine. I want to build my empire with digital marketing, and I can pay less to acquire a client through digital channels than I can through a person. So I would rather have more of the mediocre folks or the run-of-the-mill folks who can just do the work, the worker bees, than the rock stars. And every well-run company is going to have a tiered system, right? You're going to have a bell curve of some rock stars, but most of your folks are going to be your average, and average can be a high standard of average, but it's going to be your average folk. And your exceptional folk are not going to be at every corner of the business, even when you are in a highly competitive industry, right? No matter how great there is someone in the building, there is always someone greater, right? So I just want you to think about that when you think about assembling your companies, because this idea of circling the block takes on different significance when you have that mindset. Okay. So when we talk about circling the block and you talk about better talent, you have to recognize that better talent has better options, right? The person who is in high demand is demanded for a reason. They have more to offer. And when you think about what you have to do to attract, to retain, and ultimately hire that person, you have a greater opportunity on the backside when you get that person, which means you have to do more work on the front side to get that person. Okay. So when we think about that, we have to think about the fact that our quality of marketing has to be better. Our quality of leadership has to be better. Our ability to feed that person. If that person is not somebody who generates entirely their own book of business, we're going to have to be able to provide that person with high quality, intellectually stimulating work, which means the quality of our client pool has to go up in order to retain the interest of that particular person, right? There is a natural cycle of maturation that happens as we are in business longer. We become a better known entity so we can attract better clients, but that then also helps us to retain better talent because the kind of work that they can do at our company is greater than the work that they could do at John Doe's company down the road, even though John Doe might be willing to pay them more. So keeping that in mind, I just want to now give you some quality talking points for yourself to consider when you are thinking about this question of should I circle the block, right? Is the person who is somebody I had a conversation with before, maybe somebody that was that big fish for me before, I am still interested in, but I couldn't get them over the threshold last time. Maybe I can do it this time. So the first attribute I want you to think about to ask yourself the question, should I circle the block, is sometimes the current employer outbids you when you are trying to bring someone in and the employee chooses to stay with their current employer. We oftentimes will demonize that person. You know, I have my own story. Actually, I have a couple stories about that happening where we were courting someone and person was sourced through a recruiter. And by the way, that means that person wasn't looking for a job. So oftentimes it's harder to get people who are not looking for a job when they become aware of an opportunity they're excited by. Sometimes it's their ego that's stroked and they're not really looking to make a change, even when they hear about how great your change is. So you have to be wary of that. But you're in conversations with the person and ultimately you make them an offer. And their current employer, when they try to give notice, says, oh, no. If you're willing to go elsewhere for more money, I'm willing to pay you more money. Well, it always stings when the person chooses to stay because you've gone through all of the time and the energy and your process. And if you follow this podcast for any length of time, you know that there are several steps that we highly recommend that you build into your hiring process to get you to a better outcome of hire and to a better pool of people to hire. But you've gone through that process. You've done everything right. You get to the finish line, you make an offer and you want the person to accept. And they say, sorry, my current employer was willing to match your offer, so I want to stay. Well, keep in mind, humans as a characterological trait are risk averse. Okay. Some of us are more risk averse than others. Obviously, some normative qualifications you'll see in individuals will vary the extent to which they are willing and able to be a risk-tolerant person. But the human psyche seeks safety, right? And safety means staying where you are, not making a change. So if I can get the same, if the only thing that I am excited about with your offer is the salary, and maybe you're making some other offers that are exciting. Maybe I'm going to have more autonomy with your company, and I'm excited by that. Or maybe your company has a better reputation than the company that I'm at. I'm excited by that. But I can get minimally the same salary staying where I am. Why take the risk, right? Why take the risk where your company might be offering me a whole bunch of things that you might not carry through with, right? You know, you're an unknown entity to me. I don't know if you're going to be honoring whatever it is your offer. I don't know if my reputation is going to increase by virtue of being at your law firm. It could or it could not, right? If I can just do a little bit better for myself here, why go over there with all those unknowns? So you have to keep in mind that that's oftentimes the reason why a person will choose to stay, and that's about their own internal decision-making process. It's not about you. However, when that happens, there are some things that you can do to regenerate that person as a lead for being hired in your law firm. And the first thing you have to think about, and perhaps have the conversation with the candidate about, is if you thought that more money could be available to you by simply having a conversation with your current employer, there was a reason why you did not do that, right? If I'm speaking to the candidate, I'm going to mention that. I'm going to say, well, I believe that if you truly thought it was just a matter of John doesn't know I want more money, John will offer me more money if I ask for it, you would have asked for it, right? You didn't ask for it for a reason. Maybe because without the leverage of another offer, you didn't think that John would be inclined to pay you more. But here's the thing. Doesn't that say something about how John values you, right? Doesn't that say something about what John thinks your actual worth is? And if the person felt so disloyal to John that they were willing to pursue greener pastures elsewhere, what else was there about the experience of working at John Doe's law firm that wasn't necessarily as to their liking as they might like that would be available at your law firm? Are those things going to change? Or are you simply selling yourself for, to the highest bidder? And you want to have that conversation candidly, but you don't want to insult the person. You don't want to make it sound like there's something wrong with seeking the best financial outcome for oneself, right? That is our entitlement as humans to always be seeking the best deal for ourselves. But oftentimes the person who stays where they are is staying out of fear. They want the better deal. So they say, great, current employer is going to pay me more. I get the better deal. But did they really, right? Did they really get the better deal, or did they get the better check today that is not going to be better tomorrow, right? It's not going to be better at their next annual review. And all of the other indicia of the workplace that they are not satisfied with, they're just willing to tolerate for a higher paycheck. What if they could have all of those other unsatisfying parts of a working relationship go away by virtue of coming here? And they could have the higher paycheck, right? The greater opportunity, the greater chance at a greater career for themselves. So in other words, you have to sell your law firm to potential candidates. And the way that we sell doesn't change because we're selling the potential employee on coming to this law firm, right? You're still making a sale. So what is it that is about this conversation that's characterologically different than a sales conversation? And I say to you, very little, right? You still have to find out what it is that the person truly desires, why they don't have it yet, what do they think is going to be needed for them to get what is on the other side of this experience for them, how can they get to happy, and what's going to happen if they don't make that change? What are all of the things that they're going to lose by not making that change? And then ultimately, you can ameliorate all those concerns by virtue of offering them what it is that they desire. And that's the same conversation over and over again. But realize that if you're talking to somebody who's top talent, you might have to have several conversations. This might not be a apply on Monday, interview over Wednesday through Friday, make an offer on the following Monday, and they're hired by the following Friday. Right? It might not be that fast. It might be months of conversation. It might be conversation over a period of time, right? And you have to be prepared for that in this market in particular, but particularly as you are hiring up the food chain. The better the candidate, the more options they have. Typically, the more conversations you will need to have. All right. Circumstance number 2, when you might want to consider circling the block, okay? Life circumstances. Now, this is something that I also have personally experienced, but a lot of our clients have experienced this because, life be lifing sometimes. A lot of folks out there in the marketplace are experiencing challenging life experiences. Now, we all went through COVID, which had its own tumultuous impact on our lives in a host of different ways, some of which are just now being felt for people, and some of which were felt before and they're just recovering from. Right. So you might have had a conversation with someone in the past who said, all right, I'm all ready to accept that offer. And they sign on the line that's dotted and they actually say, yeah, I accept your offer. I'm ready to go. And then they call you and say, oh, crap. Sorry, I can't. and that could be just buyer's remorse. It could be that they, had second thoughts after the fact. But many times it's that something happened in their life that the uncertainty of a new job and the adjustment and adaptation period of acclimating to a new job, which by all accounts, the more intellectually sophisticated the work is that you do, and the more complex the actual delivery of service, i.e. the delivery of legal representation that it is, the more challenging time period there will be for that person to acclimate. Not because they're not a great lawyer, but because they're doing something very complex, the lawyering, in an ecosystem where they have to learn new technology, learn new people, learn new chains of command, learn new process, learn how to get things done for their clients in a way that they're not used to, right? So that usually takes anywhere from 6 to 9 months on average for a person to adapt to a new job. And it's a little bit longer in the legal industry. 9 to 12 months is the conservative estimate when you have that complex work at the center of the job that you do. So when you think about that, it's going to take longer for that person to acclimate, and they have to consider that. Sometimes they're like, I don't have time to acclimate to one more new thing because I got too many new things happening in my own personal life. I'll give you a couple of examples. Former employee of mine, she unfortunately is now deceased, but she's somebody that we all in the law firm, we adored her as a human. We loved her just to the hilt. And even as much as we loved her, she was a challenging person to work with. She was very scattered, very disorganized, but she was a sweetheart, right? So you kind of forgave that unfortunate difficulty around her work process. But one of the things that happened is early on in my career as a law firm owner, I think it was maybe 2 years into owning a law firm, she applied to a job to be an associate in my law firm. And she had the requisite amount of skill. I interviewed her. She interviewed well. She had great references. She took an assessment. She did well on the assessment. And all systems were go to hire her. I made an offer. She accepted. Great, right? And then probably we agreed that she was going to start maybe 3 weeks out. And unfortunately, she reached out to me after maybe a week or so and said, hey, can I take you to lunch? And I said, sure. Can I know why we're having lunch? Even though I'm happy to have lunch with you, something feels off. And she says, well, I'm going through something right now that I need to talk to you about because it impacts, my start date. So I said, okay. So I get there and, I said to her, well, let's talk about it. What's going on? And immediately she starts crying. And she shares with me that she was diagnosed with a pretty significant medical issue. Now, I'm not going to say what it is because if anyone knows me, they might know who I'm speaking of, and I don't want to disclose this person's private information. But the person told me that they were going through something, and they told me, in light of this, I am going to need significant medical care, and I'm concerned about having a period of time where I won't be available. I physically won't be available and I will need my health insurance. And so I don't want to have a period of time without medical insurance and all of that. And I even said I would be willing to pay for her COBRA to keep her insured. And she said, it's not that so much. It's more the rigor of having to acclimate to a new position. It's a new commute that's going to add time to my day. It's new people. I don't want anything else stressful in my life in light of what I have ahead of me with this medical challenge. And I could not respect that more. And the person was, again, very tearful because I could tell she really wanted to work with us and she was really excited about that. But she said, I just can't take that risk right now. I'm a parent. I want my child to be cared for. The numbers need to make sense, et cetera. This is not a shakedown for more money. It's not a money thing. It really is, can I be what you're hiring? And I don't think I can, right? I need to be able to be, where I am. And I think we all can understand that, right? We expect more of new folks coming in. If somebody came in on Monday and immediately said, I need grace and space to be able to not be my best self for an extended period of time, you'd be like, hey, wait a minute, that's not what I hired, right? Versus someone who's been with you and has been a loyal employee for half a year, half a decade says, stuff is going on right now. I'm sorry, I'm not my best self. I'm trying. You would give them more grace and space because you have a relationship with them, right? They've invested in you. You've invested in them. That's how this works. So I understood it, right? But that person, they didn't leave under bad terms. I was disappointed, but I didn't hold it against them. And 4 years later, I hired her. 4 years later, we had another ad up. She personally called me, and we had stayed in touch. We would send each other emails periodically. We connected on social media, etc. And when the opportunity presented itself, I hired her. Why? Because she was just as good an attorney. In fact, now she had 4 more years of experience. She was that much more valuable to us. And because she handled the circumstance of saying, I said yes, but I need to say no, and told me what the circumstance was, right? Because life does happen to people. In that scenario, circling the block, I honestly, even before I posted the ad, I should have thought about it. But I'm so glad that she reached out to us when we posted the ad again, because she was a great attorney for us. She was great for the culture. She was great for the clients. I can go on and on. But point is, perfect opportunity, right? Someone bows out because of life. When their life settles down, reach out to them again and stay in contact with them, right? Stay in contact with people that you regard highly enough that you want to hire them and you can't for whatever reason. And oftentimes the can't is because of something going on in your life. Okay. Last circumstance. Now, this one is going to trigger some folks, but I think it's important to say this is definitely a time where you can and should circle the block. So this is when number 3 circumstance is when your firm now has more to offer someone that they want the position you're offering. Okay. Now, again, I said this is likely to trigger some folks. There are a whole lot of people that move on from your law firm or move on from your offer and don't accept your offer because you're just not offering enough. And by that, I don't just mean money. Sometimes it's you're not offering enough compensation, but sometimes it's you're not offering health insurance. You're not offering 401k. You're not offering enough PTO. You're not offering the type of work environment that they want, right? Maybe you are a virtual firm and they want to be in person because they know their personality requires that. It could be that you're not offering enough mentoring, right? You are one person who has a team of 4 younger attorneys because you hired in a way that we here at Law Firm Mentor would not recommend. You stack the deck full of baby lawyers and now you're full-time parenting at your law firm and you don't have time to take someone under your wing and teach them how to try cases and develop their career and give them opportunities, right? You're not your best for them yet because you're the best that you can be right now, right? You're showing up every day as you can. You shouldn't criticize yourself for that, but they need more in their professional world than you have to offer them. And by the way, this is part of the reason why we highly recommend that at the stage of you being a small law firm that is trying to really scale into the next level, you need to hire fully grown adults. And I mean, you need to hire people who are adults in their practice of law and in their maturity so that they can be a set it and forget it to a certain degree while you are building out, and they can help you to build out infrastructure that will allow you to have more free time so you can do things like mentor folks coming in. You can do things like make opportunities for people to advance their career. But you might not be there at the time that you had a conversation with somebody that was really talented, really up and coming, right? One of my law partners right now is somebody who applied to us when we were a younger firm, a newer firm, and she still recounts that she was very disappointed when she didn't get a chance to work with us, and in particular, to work with me. And the reality is, I said to her, I'm glad that we didn't give you the consideration that you would have wanted back then, because if you had come here 5, 6, 7 years ago, wanting to work with me, you would not have gotten that experience, right? Now, I can work more directly with my attorneys because I consider that to be my primary focus. I am a chief people officer in my law firm, right? I develop people. I give them opportunities to advance their career. I get them on stages, right? I get them published. I get them accolades. I build their profile. I do the things that will help someone to say their career is advancing. If she had come here wanting that 6, 7 years ago, No way could I have given that to her. My firm was not at the place developmentally, maturity-wise, where I would have had the time for that. It would have been a burden on me, and she would have felt that I feel burdened by her. And I don't want that to be the experience, right? I want people to have the experience of, I'm excited to help mentor and develop them. This is a great opportunity for their career. It's a great opportunity for me and my leadership growth. It's a great opportunity all around, right? It's a win-win. If you can't offer the win-win to someone when they are looking at your firm and considering coming here, don't begrudge them going elsewhere, right? Be happy for them, right? Be happy that they made a choice for themselves that's going to ultimately inure to their benefit, even though it might disappoint you. And then you can release that and say, they did what was right for them. They went and got their win. And my win is that I got the opportunity to hire the person that I ultimately hired, which was my win. Even if your win comparing who you hired versus who you wanted might not be what you ultimately said was ideal for you, it still was an opportunity for you. Okay. So in that scenario, if later, years down the road, they apply again, or you have a recruiter go reach out to them, or you reach out to them directly and you get them into your ecosystem, be thrilled, right? That's a perfect opportunity to circle the block. Now you have more to offer. Now you can say, I can give you exactly what it is that you need. And let's talk about where you are in your career path right now, because it might perfectly align with what I have to offer someone at your level to get to the next level. And I'm sure if I were to interview my partner on this podcast, she would say, yeah, I'm really thrilled that I got to have this experience, right? I cut my teeth, learned how to lawyer over here. And now that I want to step up in my career, I'm at a place where there's freedom to do that. There's encouragement to do that. There's opportunities. You make opportunities available for me to do that. And it's a win-win, right? That's what you're ultimately seeking for yourself and for the people that you hire is the win-win. All right. Today on the Crushing Chaos with Law Firm Mentor podcast, we have been talking about, should you circle the block on your past potential hires? And the answer is, in certain circumstances, absolutely. All right. We will see you on our next episode.